We're in a cabin of one of the spaceships of the Vogon constructor fleet.
Ah, this is obviously some strange usage of the word safe that I hadn't previously been aware of.
It started as a radio play but turned into a phenomenon across multiple media.
There a dead telephone sanitizer?
Best kind.
What's he doing here?
Not a lot.
It's a comedy about a very ordinary man travelling across the universe with the help of his towel, and an outdated e-book called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
I think you ought to know I'm feeling very depressed.
There is a tendency when writing about Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy to attempt to mimic the style of Douglas Adams, and of course do it fairly poorly. I mean, we'll try to resist the temptation, and any time we get too close to faux Adams, we'll stick a coin in this jar. This is the story of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, a wholly remarkable... Normally we would talk about a single TV show or a movie, but here we're talking about a franchise that's appeared across more media than Richard Branson announcing his latest venture, Virgin Mergin, a device that makes it easier for indecisive people to merge into heavy traffic. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy started as a radio play. There was a re-recorded audio version released as an LP, several stage versions, a book series, a television series, a video game, and eventually a feature film. Douglas Adams' creation was infinitely quotable, and it's something you would learn firsthand as it came in between Monty Python and The Simpsons as something constantly quoted by the most annoying person you knew. Of course, if you were the person constantly quoting The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, then people will surely have recognised your brilliance by now.
I've just had an unhappy love affair, so I don't see why anybody else should have a good time.
Only Douglas Adams could make a number both funny and iconic.
42!
Douglas Adams died in 2001 at the age of 49, but his legacy continues with his later books also being adapted to audio formats. There was the 2005 feature film that he had been working on for years, and a potential new adaptation that's been hinted at for ages. This video is a sort of look at Hitchhikers across its various media with a focus on the BBC TV series and the 2005 film, since they're the most visual. It's not a Douglas Adams biography, but there's an element of that too. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy wasn't a parody or a spoof of science fiction. It just used science fiction elements to comment on real things that Douglas Adams wanted to talk about. Parts of the franchise had become dated by technological changes.
Even the ones with digital watches.
Such as the very concept of the guide being a fixed book. But if you swapped out mentions of digital watches with computing devices like smartphones, then you'd pretty much get the exact same effect.
Yes, I transmitted a new entry after the editor. He had to trim it a bit, but it's still an improvement. What's he say now? Mostly harmless.
Almost every version of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy starts off in the same way. Arthur Dent is trying to prevent his home from being demolished to make way for a road bypass, while his strange friend Ford Prefect is trying to prepare him for bigger things.
How would you react if I told you that I'm not from Guildford after all, but from a small planet somewhere in the vicinity of Beetlejuice?
Then the Vogon fleet arrives to demolish the Earth, to make way for a hyperspace bypass. Arthur and Ford hitch a lift on the Vogon ship, are tortured by the Vogons.
Tell me how good you thought my poem was.
And then rescued from certain death by ex-galactic president Zaphod Beeblebrox and his girlfriend Trillian.
Zaphod Beeblebrox, this is a very large drink. Hi.
Now that they're on the Heart of Gold, the ship with the infinite improbability drive that was stolen by Beeblebrox, they will find the dead world of Magrathea, who once manufactured planets. And Arthur discovers the devastating truth that the Earth was actually an organic computer calculating the ultimate question to life, the universe, and everything. To which the answer was 42.
The ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything!
Yes, but what actually is it?
A quick meal at Millie Ways, the restaurant at the end of the universe, leads Arthur and Ford to crash landing on a planet that just happens to be the Earth, but 2 million years ago. Many versions of Hitchhikers end at this point, while others will continue the story in various ways. It's also really important to note that there really is no definitive version of Hitchhikers, just the one that you most identify with, whether it's the book, the radio series, the movie, the television series, or just an audiobook. Douglas Adams had, up to the point this video was posted in 2024, been heavily involved with the scripting of all of them.
Wait a minute. What's this switch? What? Where? No. I was only fooling. We're going to die after all.
Douglas Adams was from a family of academic and scientific achievers, born in Cambridge, but his family soon moved away, possibly because somebody in the family had developed a morbid fear of bicycle theft. Later on, his family moved to Essex, perhaps because they were really keen to be near the beating heart of Britain, Stansted fucking Airport. It may surprise some people, but not everybody living in Cambridge went to Cambridge University, or not even Anglia Ruskin. Douglas Adams, however, did make it to Cambridge University, where he made a number of connections. One of the things Cambridge, that's the university, not the town, is known for is the Footlights Club, which puts on comedy, reviews and cabaret shows, and they gave us the likes of Peter Cook, Dudley Moore, Alan Bennett, John Cleese, Graham Chapman, Eric Idle, Eleanor Bron, Tim Brooke Taylor, Bill Oddie, Graham Garden, Emma Thompson, Hugh Laurie, Stephen Fry, Olivia Colman, Richard Ayoade, and so many more. Like this video so far, the list really does go on and on.
Arsenal without a chance?
No, it's just the world's about to end.
Oh, yes, so you said.
When Douglas Adams turned up to Cambridge, he didn't get into footlights at first, so... But eventually he did, writing sketches and performing in a few shows during his educational years. But backing up a bit, during his gap year, Adams was a penniless hitchhiker travelling through Europe with a borrowed copy of Hitchhiker's Guide to Europe. Depending on who's telling the story, he lay in a field drunk in Austria, staring up at the stars and thinking to himself, somebody should write a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Adams has told the story so many times that some of the details change each time, but the gist was the same. It just took several years for Adams to get round to writing it. It's the hitchhiker bit, not the embellishment of the origin story. In the early to mid-70s, he had met John Cleese, later did some work as Graham Chapman's writing partner after Cleese and Chapman had stopped writing together. Adams even had a very small amount of his work featured in the final series of Monty Python, as well as a blink and you'll miss it Walk On. There were further collaborations with Graham Chapman, including some work for Ringo Starr that didn't go too far. But by the mid-70s, Adams struck out on his own. Douglas Adams had grown up with radio comedy, and was in love with all of the things that you could conjure up on radio that couldn't possibly be achieved on television or in movies. It also helped that most of his early forays into professional writing were on radio. It also didn't hurt that a number of people he'd met through the footlights were now working in the industry. Adams was in his mid-20s in 1976 and feeling his career was going nowhere fast. He'd been taking odd jobs to get by and occasionally performing in live shows. His style of long-form humour was not best suited to the sort of script work that was most easily available to him at the time, which was writing short topical gags for radio comedies.
It was either that or back to the dole queue on Monday.
In essence, he was mostly harmless. Adams had always wanted to be a writer and a performer, but the people he worked with had realised his creativity was best utilised behind a typewriter rather than stinking up the stage. Adams was also rather tall, so anytime he was on stage with other actors, the production was in danger of being mistaken for a low-effort version of Gulliver's Travels.
There's an infinite number of monkeys out here who want to talk to us about this script for Hamlet they've worked out.
Adams was inventive, but found the actual process of getting ideas onto the typed page tortuous, and he would procrastinate or become easily distracted. One such distraction was to take long baths. He was also quite disorganised, one time on holiday making his friends wait an eternity while he searched high and low for his towel so that they could go to the beach.
If you're going to survive out there, you've really got to know where your towel is.
In 1977, Douglas Adams had a pitch meeting with BBC radio producer Simon Brett about a comedy, and the one that got the most traction was the idea of a science fiction comedy, perhaps an anthology where the Earth was destroyed at the end of each episode. Adams had a commission for a pilot script, but he soon realised that it might work better as a continuing story, ultimately known as The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Once the script was written and recorded, he would receive £165 for his work. Radio comedy is the path to riches undreamt of. Of course, the idea of riches from radio comedy was certainly a dream, but for where Adams was at this point in his career, that was an absolute fortune. Just think of all the bubble bath he could now afford.
Sponge, somebody.
Douglas Adams wanted his show to sound like a rock album with production values to match, while most radio comedies at the time were still made with performers huddling around a single microphone reading the script while some occasional sound effects were played into the studio, while an audience registered their approval with laughter, or not, no pressure. Hitchhikers would be a show that would require actors having their own microphones, sometimes acting from a cupboard in order to isolate various voices since some would have filters added. Hitchhikers would be made in stereo, which was impossible for a comedy. Some people at the BBC thought people would not know which speaker the punchline was going to come from.
And we are currently in orbit around it.
Sayford, I can't help what you may personally be in orbit around, but this ship...
Computer!
Oh, no.
Hi there!
In short, Douglas Adams wanted Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy to push the envelope of radio comedy. From the second episode on, the show was produced by Geoffrey Perkins, someone who'd later be part of the group making programs like Radioactive and later its TV incarnation, KYTV. Hitchhikers also had the benefit of being able to have custom sound effects from the BBC Radiophonic Workshop, most notably the unique sounds for the guide being activated. For a musical backdrop, most of the first series was made with pre-existing music, featuring snippets of Jean-Michel Jarre, Fripp and Eno, Ligeti, Terence Riley, while later versions of Hitchhikers had custom scores. Paddy Kingsland from the Radiophonic Workshop created the music and sound effects for the television version, while Kingsland and Dick Mills had created sound effects for the radio show. Hitchhikers would be in effect a show made in the editing, and hence it was later made in a multi-track studio much like a rock album, with overdubs and a lot of editing. Later on, it wouldn't be uncommon to record some actors separately and drop in their lines during the editing. And unusually for a BBC light entertainment program, there would be no studio audience.
I came from a planet called Earth,
I know, you keep going on about it. It sounds awful.
I once had to perform a small part in a local amateur dramatic society production of The Importance of Being Earnest, and there was no audience. In hindsight, we really should have rescheduled so we weren't up against the final episode of Pride and Prejudice.
Yes, well, I can see that would be a problem.
On a personal note, The Importance of Being Earnest was very important to me. I had auditioned, but I was not cast. But I think they felt a little bit sorry for me, so they gave me the part of Ernest.
Well, you don't think that's wrong, do you?
From the mid-70s, Douglas Adams had also been submitting script ideas to the Doctor Who production office, but it wasn't until that series was overseen by producer Graham Williams and script editor Anthony Reid that Adams' work was taken seriously. With his pilot script for Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy as a calling card, Adams offered the venerable series a plot involving a space pirate hijacking planets. There would be major rewrites, but Adams soon found himself writing 4 episodes of Doctor Who at the same time as having to write the remaining 5 episodes of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
And now this happens.
Towards the end of his time working on the radio scripts, Adams found inspiration flagging somewhat, and his friend and sometimes housemate John Lloyd contributed some material to some of the later episodes. What's John Lloyd's and what's pure Adams is hard to tell, though in later versions of the final episode, the shape-changing Hagunenons are replaced by the super loud rock band Disaster Area's stunt ship.
It has the words, "Don't Panic," inscribed in large, friendly letters on the cover.
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy debuted on BBC Radio 4 in March of 1978, and while listening figures were closer to 0 than the number 1, enough people heard it, who told their friends, who told their friends, etc. The growing word of mouth led to letters sent to the BBC, which led to a repeat mere weeks after the final episode aired, and again a few months later. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy on radio sounded unlike any other BBC radio comedy program at the time. It had more in common with the sort of audio production you'd get in progressive rock albums. Also, as it was based around the eponymous book, scenes were often linked in the form of a book entry narrated by Peter Jones in his controlled but slightly confused tones. Another thing, the theme music. They had wanted something that said travelling but also futuristic, and what was suggested was an instrumental written by Bernie Leadon from the Eagles' 1974 album One of These Nights, released just before the band was to hit it big. Journey of the Sorcerer has become so associated with Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy that it's pretty much impossible to tell the story of Arthur Dent, Ford Prefect, Zaphod, Trillian and Marvin without this piece of music.
Sounds awful.
Can it, Marvin?
Journey of the Sorcerer's popularity has also, unfortunately, led to an uptick in sales of potentially hundreds of banjos that now clutter up cupboards and wardrobes and garages of Hitchhikers fans across the universe.
The planet you inhabited was commissioned, paid for, and run by the mice. It was destroyed 5 minutes before the completion of the purpose for which it was built.
Marvin the Paranoid Android, a manifestation of an internet comment, was somewhat based on another comedy writer, Andrew Marshall.
It's rubbish.
Stephen Moore's performance alongside the vocal treatment made a character with a brain the size of a planet come alive.
Life. Don't talk to me about life.
Simon Jones loves Arthur Dent, but dislikes the assumption that he is just as fussy as his most famous character.
Is there any tea on this spaceship?
Mark Wing Davey was a campus hippie turned into a 70s space swinger from Beetlejuice.
Did you think of that, Earthman?
Well, all I did was...
That's a pretty hoopy piece of thinking, you know that?
Well, it was nothing, really.
Oh, was it? Oh, well, forget it then.
Susan Sheridan played the original Trillian, somebody that Arthur had once chatted up at a party, who then proceeded to friend zone Arthur after she met the President of the Galaxy. Geoffrey McGivern gave Ford Prefect's disreputable guide researcher a voice. That is, the voice of somebody who didn't always answer a question.
Why are people born? Why do they die? And why do they spend so much of the intervening time wearing digital watches?
Adams created the character of the whale that was willed into existence only to be killed straight away after watching a violent television series, in this case the 1970s cop show Cannon, starring William Conrad, where Adams saw background characters being killed off without so much as a tear shed by their friends. So Adams invented a character with the intention of it being killed off.
That's it! Ground! I wonder if it'll be friends with me.
But damn did he make you feel for it.
What's this?
Well, mate.
Likewise, Adams based the intergalactic police Shooty and Bang Bang after Starsky and Hutch.
It isn't easy being a cop.
What did he say?
He said it isn't easy being a cop.
Well, that's his problem, isn't it?
Another character was a Magrathean who had a sad secret, which turned out to be his name.
Who are you?
My name is not important.
Adams had wanted something that sounded rude but could still be broadcast on BBC Radio, and after his first attempt seemed unbroadcastable and perhaps actionable by the probably made-up barrister Sir John Farty Fuckballs QC, that Adams ended up with the semi-rude Slarty Bartfast.
My name is Slarty Bartfast.
I beg your pardon?
Slarty Bartfast.
The infinite improbability drive came from Adams writing himself into a corner and using that narrative dead end to pull a rabbit out of the hat. You know, pulling rabbits out of hats isn't all that it's cracked up to be. Just ask all those apprentice magicians with their heads covered in rabbit shit. The Golga Frenchums were a society that rid themselves of the useless third of the population by sending them off into space: hairdressers, telephone sanitizers, TV producers, marketers, management consultants, etc. It is not hard to imagine an update of Hitchhikers filling the B arc with tech bros, influencers, and YouTubers.
Tell me what you think I'm thinking.
I think you're thinking it's time we get off this ship.
I think you're right.
I think you're right.
How?
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy on radio was a hit, but it was only a hit radio series. Adams spent a short stint as a BBC radio producer before accepting an offer to become the script editor for Doctor Who's 17th season. The script editor's job on that series was basically to keep writers on track, write additional scenes as required, and if necessary perform major rewrites of scenes for reasons of taste, budget, or production reality. None of this came easy to Douglas Adams. His year on the series was considered one of the worst made during the show's original run, in that it looked even more cheap and tatty than the show's reputation would suggest. Scripts not written by Adams that year were a major problem, despite all of them being written by writers with much more experience than Douglas Adams. As script editor, Adams had to perform a major rewrite on one script by writer David Fisher, which, while it was written under a pseudonym, would become an instant classic. City of Death was a witty and pacey script helped enormously by Tom Baker and Lalla Ward's chemistry, and the casting of Julian Glover as the time-splintered villain Scarif. Douglas Adams was also slated to write the season closer, the 6-part epic named Sharda, which was halfway through production before a BBC strike ended up scuttling the shows altogether. It's since been completed with the animation bridging the gaps, but in the meantime, Adams would reuse concepts from both serials in his post-Hitchhikers work, Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency.
Green salad, please.
A green salad.
Douglas Adams would occasionally drop in names of friends and acquaintances, but one in particular caused a few edits and rewrites to later versions. The source of the worst poetry of all was initially named after an actual person that Adams knew who did not see the funny side.
Yes, and they want to buy it off you.
What, the question?
Yeah.
No, your brain.
What?
After the gradual success of the radio series, a Christmas special was commissioned, to be followed soon by a 5-episode second series continuing the story. Whereas Adams found distractions to prevent him from working, now he had competing projects to prevent him from finishing anything with a deadline. Throughout 1979, while Adams was attempting to write 5 radio scripts, he was also writing and script editing Doctor Who, writing the first Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy book, tinkering with his original scripts for a re-recorded version for commercial release as an album, and generally being lauded for his work. He had a slight falling out with friend John Lloyd about future collaborations on Hitchhikers when Adams felt it was his baby and his alone. They would patch up their relationship eventually, with Lloyd being an associate producer on the television series. John Lloyd would go off to either create, co-create or produce Not the 9 O'Clock News, Blackadder and QI. Adams and Lloyd would also co-write a book, The Meaning of Life, which involved creating fake dictionary definitions for words based on real-world place names.
It's odd, isn't it?
The second radio series was created in fits and starts, with producer Geoffrey Perkins waiting for usable scripts from Adams, which he had been dashing off at the very last minute.
Oh, I don't know though, why stop just when I'm enjoying it?
The second radio series does actually feature some of my favourite Hitchhikers moments, but in general, Douglas Adams' dissatisfaction with it at the time meant a lot of it was jettisoned when he worked on his novels.
What does teleport mean?
What did you say?
After the second radio series was broadcast in early 1980, that was it for radio for the time being, as now television beckoned. Douglas Adams had written a script for a pilot episode which was basically a visual version of the original radio script. That had gone down well with anybody who'd seen it, and so that pilot became the first of a series of 6 episodes of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Impact minus 150 seconds. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Please call me Eddie if it will help you relax.
The television series would debut on the BBC in early 1982 and would give a visual reference to many who'd previously only heard the series on radio or read the book. This is both good and bad because we had an iconic visual representation of Marvin the Paranoid Android, still voiced by Stephen Moore, but there was also the dead mannequin's head stuck to Mark Wing Davey's shoulder.
Hey, what?
The ship picked them up all by itself.
So what?
The ship picked it. Oh, forget it and go back to sleep, will you?
Hey.
With all the will in the world, a 1982 BBC TV budget was never going to adequately reproduce Zaphod's second head.
Fellow, Zaphod's just this guy, you know.
And for many, that rather expensive failed effect is one of the first things that people will visualize if you mention the series.
Yeah.
Look, in radio or in a book, your visual effects budget is unlimited, which of course precludes those with aphantasia and YouTubers.
You know, it's at times like this, when I'm stuck in a Vogon airlock with a man from Beetlejuice about to die of asphyxiation in deep space, that I really wish I'd listened to what my mother told me when I was young.
Why? What did she tell you?
I don't know, I didn't listen.
Some of the cast returned, such as both Peter Jones and Simon Jones, Mark Wing Davey, Stephen Moore and Richard Vernon as Slarty Bartfast, while others were new.
At the first hint of trouble, they turn totally black, and thus prevent you from seeing anything that might alarm you.
David Dixon was Ford Prefect and Sandra Dickinson was cast as Trillian.
Oh, great. For this, I get my ears pierced.
Who, of course, brought along her then husband and Hitchhiker's Guide superfan, Peter Davison, who would play the dish of the day.
Don't worry, sir. I'll be very humane.
What's eating you, Earthman?
The scripts for the television series would hew very closely to the scripts from the re-recorded LP version, just with allowances for the fact that they were now visuals. You could now sell a joke with a look.
Your monkey has got it right.
Producer and director Alan J.W. Bell would mainly be known for sitcoms and had a disdain for the sort of science fiction programs the BBC produced, such as Doctor Who and Blake 7. Bell was determined that where possible, Hitchhikers would look and sound great. Adams agreed with that sentiment, just not the way Bell chose to go about achieving it. The pair clashed throughout the making of the show. One argument won by Bell was to have Arthur remain in his bathrobe and pyjamas throughout, which has become an iconic look.
What happened? A sign lit up saying, please do not press this button again.
There are some unusually high production values for a BBC show at that time. The increase in effort shows with things like post-sync footsteps making actors walking around wooden sets actually sound like they're in a spaceship. Bell used a lot of cutting-edge effects in the making of the show, combining images in post-production rather than live in the studio. Lots of glass shots, use of Quantel devices for effects, and most notably, the computer readouts linking the scenes. Of course, they were drawn and animated by hand by Rod Lord at PS Studios with his assistant Kevin Davies, a Hitchhiker superfan. For all the various faults of the TV show, the infographics visualising the book entries are fantastic. Hitchhiker's Guide on Television was unusual for a BBC light entertainment or comedy program in that, like the radio show, it did not have a studio audience reaction on the soundtrack, but one was recorded for the pilot. The series did well enough for talk of a second series, and Adams had put down some notes, but was not prepared to talk to the BBC unless they brought in a new producer, preferably one of Adams' colleagues from the radio. The BBC didn't budge, and that's where this version of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy ends. Adams would of course realise his fortune was to be made in books, not getting involved in the internal workings of the BBC.
It shall be called the Earth.
Oh, what a dull name.
Douglas Adams would later express a level of disappointment with the way the television series turned out, and he was determined to retain a level of control over his creation. Looking back, you can see how many of the bits that were added, some that are new, some repurposed from books, records, stage plays, etc. Sometimes those additions feel a bit flat, like a cosmic string that really doesn't want to get out of bed.
Think our minds must be too highly trained, Magic Thighs.
It's got a good cast, and the visual upgrade over most BBC comedies and indeed science fiction series of the day is apparent. A few dodgy special effects can get in the way, but probably the best thing in the whole program are the guide readouts. The guide excerpts were a radio conceit that could have been the hardest element to visualize, and instead ended up as being the thing that really does define the show, and has also held up the best over the decades, unlike that funny picture in Uncle Dorian's attic. As such, Adams would eventually go on to write 5 Hitchhikers books, where they concentrated on being books rather than rewriting the TV and radio scripts, and every now and then he would entertain the notion of a film version whenever a film producer suggested making a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy movie backed by Hollywood money. Adams worked on non-film projects, a new series of books based on the disreputable detective Dirk Gently, multimedia projects such as Starship Titanic. He evangelized computers and the internet, became a father, and worked on his movie script. And then nothing. Adams passed away in 2001, leaving behind devastated fans and a slew of unfinished projects. Other writers were drafted in to finish those works or to continue them, as happened in the case of the Hitchhikers books and the movie. In the 1990s, Adams had discussed with producer Dirk Maggs the idea of adapting the later books into the radio play format. This eventually happened, where any available cast members of the radio series were brought back into what would become another 4 series of audio adventures starting in 2004. There would also be a tour where the radio cast would perform the radio scripts in front of an audience. Douglas Adams' work on the Hitchhiker's script for a feature film would eventually see the light of day when the film was released in 2005. It's generally spoken about by Hitchhikers fans in 2 ways: quiet whispered tones, or angry shouting bluster. For some, it makes the cardinal sin of not being exactly like earlier versions of Hitchhikers.
You think you've got problems? What are you supposed to do if you are a manically depressed robot?
Douglas Adams attempted to make something for a broader audience, and I quite like it, so that's something to look at another time. My first recollection of Hitchhikers was hearing a minute or 2 of the radio series when it was broadcast locally on a Sunday morning, probably around 80 or 81. It was a scene on the surface of Magrathea in episode 3, and then I heard nothing about it until the television show was screened in weekly installments sometime in 82 or 83, and then it would occasionally be shown a few times in the early evening time slot that had normally rotated between Doctor Who, The Goodies, Monkey, Carl Sagan's Cosmos, or whatever. I loved it, but I really didn't get the cleverness of many of the jokes as I was just too young, and truth be told, too stupid. Look, well, I've cured one of those things, and years later I'd wish I'd been a bit older when experiencing Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy for the very first time.
How are you feeling? Like a military academy. Bits of me keep passing out.
A late-night broadcast of the radio series in the late 80s saw me managing to hear the radio episodes for the first time, where I would swap off-air cassette recordings with a friend for the episodes that I missed. I have at various times attempted to read the books start to finish, but I usually get bogged down during the 3rd book, Life, the Universe and Everything, and then tend to drift onto something else. Reading is easy, comprehension is damn hard. Just look at Uncle Norm's Facebook rants about roundabout etiquette, plus his subsequent rants about ambulances, hospitals, and trying to get an all-over suntan while wearing a full body cast.
This fact may safely be made the subject of suspense, since it is of no significance whatsoever.
The TV series is good, the radio series is pretty good, the movie's okay. They're all basically different timeline versions of the same basic story, but I've often felt the LP version of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Restaurant at the End of the Universe are peak Hitchhikers. Also, I enjoyed the feel of the second radio series, which has subsequently been mostly ignored by Adams. Sound off in the comments about your favourite. But here's a challenge. Keep it to what you like and forget about what you don't.
Wow, did he ever make it mega big? Wow, bigger than the biggest thing ever, other than me.
Hitchhikers influenced everything from early internet sites like Babelfish, animated comedy Rick and Morty, and in a full circle moment seems to be as big an influence on modern Doctor Who as classic Who was to Hitchhikers. Have astronomy conventions ever recovered since Hitchhikers and the movie Beetlejuice have seen an uptick in punch-ups over how to pronounce Beetlejuice, Betelgeuse, Betelgeuse? Also, let's not mention paranoid androids, life, the universe and everything, pan-galactic gargle blasters, Vogon poetry, Slarty Bartfast, and the number 42. Many people have toiled away trying to make the number 42 into something with cosmic significance. On the other hand, Douglas Adams has found it a funny number. How many people does it take to change a light bulb at a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy convention? The answer? It's still 1. The other 41 people are just showing off.
Did I do something wrong this morning, or has the world always been like this and I've been too wrapped up in myself to notice?
I've just enjoyed each version of Hitchhikers on multiple occasions. Any fan will have a version that they see as absolutely definitive and the others are crap, which 9 times out of 10 will quite coincidentally, of course, be the first version of the story that they encountered.
You're all a lot of useless bloody loonies! That was the reason.
Either way, it's a unique and brilliant melding of science fiction and comedy.
I'll be down in a minute.
That makes 2 of us.
If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos. 38, 39, 40, 41.